Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers the Portland Trailblazers, who are coming off of their first Western Conference Finals appearance since 2000, which is a great accomplishment even when you consider that they didn't actually win a game in the series against the Warriors. However, despite this success, there are still questions for this team, namely, how do they push this team to an even higher level of play that allows them to be true championship contenders, or is that even possible with their current roster? Let's go ahead and take a look and see what options they have. First, let's talk about some building blocks for this team. The first two are obviously Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. Lillard had another outstanding scoring season and was pretty much the same All-NBA caliber player that we've come to expect over the last few years. There are still some questions with him, specifically his next contract, which I'll cover a bit later, but for now the positives are pretty obvious. And the story is pretty much the same for McCollum as well. This season gave us no indication that he was any worse or better of a player than he has been for the last few years, and for both him and Lillard, age isn't an issue yet, so they should be good to continue producing at this level for at least the next 2 to 3 seasons, so long as they remain in Portland. Beyond that, things get pretty interesting. Jusuf Nurkic was having a career year before a serious leg injury ended his season, and even though he is still just 24 years old, it is worth wondering how that injury will affect him. If he recovers properly, however, he should be an outstanding asset for them. He's locked up on a team-friendly deal for the next 3 seasons, which is a huge plus for this team considering their other salary obligations, both present and future. His bruising style of play in the paint complements the games of Lillard and McCollum well, and he will certainly be a part of the future of this team no matter what direction they decide to go in, so long as he recovers from his injury properly. And beyond that, there's just a trio of young guys that are showing varying signs that they're actually going to work out long term. First is Jake Layman, who got his first real taste of NBA playing time this year and showed some flashes but struggled with consistency. He had his moments in the regular season but barely played it all in the playoffs and is a free agent this summer, so they'll have to give him a new contract to see what value he provides in the future. Next is Rodney Hood, who is also a free agent this summer, but the team should be much more motivated to bring him back than Layman based off of his playoff performances. He's always been a talented scorer, but has struggled with consistency in his stops in both Utah and Cleveland, and that did extend to his current Blazers tenure as well. But there are glimpses of hope that shine through that show just how good he can be when he has his confidence. So long as the deal is reasonable, I would expect Hood to be with the Blazers next year as well, and his continued development as a scoring wing would be a huge boost to their rotation. And last is big man Zach Collins, who was the 10th pick in the 2017 draft and hasn't quite shown what you'd really like to see out of him to this point. It was just his second season and he did show improvement. It's kind of tough to get excited about. Now, don't get me wrong, he does still have potential in his athleticism and potential to be a floor spacer, and he does still have 2 years left on his contract. But in his third season, he'll really need to show tangible results of being more than just a rotation big for the team to want to invest in him long term. One thing I will say, however, about all of these guys and even some that I didn't mention, the Blazers do an awesome job of developing their own picks and players that are cast-offs from other teams, which gives me more hope than normal that they'll end up becoming good players. Moving on now, let's talk about free agency. As of right now, the Blazers are on pace for $126 million in payroll for next season, which is well over the salary cap. This is largely because they're paying 2 different players over $25 million a year, those being Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, and 4 players in addition to them over $10 million a year: Evan Turner, Nurkic, Mo Harkless, and Myers Leonard. And to make matters worse, they do have a few significant free agents this summer as well: Al-Farouq Aminu, Seth Curry, and Hood and Layman, like I talked about earlier. Because their payroll is so high, they might end up choosing to just let a few or all of these players walk this summer, which would be a pretty big blow to their team because they do each have their own value. I already talked about Hood and Layman. While Aminu has been a really good 3-and-D wing for them for a few years now, that provides them much needed size on the perimeter, and although Curry is very much a shooting specialist, he had his moments of value in both the regular and postseason this year. But realistically, they'll probably only bring back 1 or 2 of those guys, likely placing a priority on Hood and Aminu. They really need to try and bring back those 2 on reasonable deals, because if they don't, they'll be relying on unproven players like Gary Trent and Anthony Simons to bolster their wing rotation. If they can bring them back on something around $5 million a year each on average, that would be ideal, and then maybe Curry and Layman would be interested in coming back on minimum contracts. Now, the issue is this team would like to stay under the $132 million luxury tax for next season as well, and a combined $10 million a year commitment to Hood and Aminu would put them over that number. So maybe a salary dump would be in order in that scenario, or once again, they might just have to pick only one to bring back, probably Hood. Now, having established the Blazers' current free agency situation, let's talk about some future options for them. It's pretty easy to see that this team has a ton of money coming off the books in the summer of 2020, with the contracts of Turner, Harkless, and Leonard all expiring. That is over $40 million in expiring contracts, which would theoretically give them over $30 million in cap space that summer if they chose to not take on any long-term money this summer. So option one here would be to sign one-year deals this summer, run it back with mostly the same group next year, then reshape their roster around Lillard, McCollum, and Nurkic with cap space with those big contracts coming off the books. Although this would kind of just resign them to accepting a worse fate next year than what they just experienced, because they would likely let all of their free agents go and thus be a worse team, it wouldn't be a bad idea to wait until that flexibility opens up to spend their money a bit more wisely than they did in the past on guys like Turner, Harkless, and Leonard. Another option would be to use those expiring contracts as assets in a trade, and the first player that comes to mind on a team who would like to get rid of their contract and can help the Blazers win is Kevin Love of the Cleveland Cavaliers. I've mentioned him before in the Rockets What's Next video, and I still think he can really help a team with his offense and floor spacing, and it wouldn't take all that much to get him aside from some cap relief and a young asset or two. For example, they could send the Harkless and Leonard expirings, plus Simons and or their 2019 first, or the player selected with it, in exchange for Love. He would provide them post-scoring and spacing in the front court, and a five-man group of Lillard, McCollum, Hood, Love, and Nurkic would be a formidable one. Now, the issue here would be that Love would take up a lot of their long-term cap space, and they'd only have $9 to $10 million in space in 2020 with him on the roster, and he's under contract on a big deal for the next few years. So it is risky, and there are pros and cons, but it is something to consider. Now, believe it or not, I haven't even covered the biggest point for this Trailblazers team moving forward, and that is the cost of keeping the CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard backcourt together past the summer of 2021. First, let's talk about Lillard, who as of a few days ago is now eligible for a Supermax extension by virtue of being named to another All-NBA team, and by all indications, the Blazers seem inclined to offer that deal to him. That would lock him up on a contract in addition to the 2 years that he still has left on his current one that pays him an average of nearly $48 million a year for 4 years and gets more expensive as he ages. Now, don't get me wrong, Lillard is an outstanding player. Please hear me when I say that, and this is not meant to take anything away from him, but he will be 30 by the time his new Supermax deal kicks in, which means the Blazers will be paying a 30, 31, 32, and 33-year-old Damian Lillard an average of $48 million a year. So when I do a What's Next video on the Blazers in 2024, I'm going to be looking on Basketball Reference and seeing a $50+ million expiring contract for a 33-year-old Damian Lillard. Now, on the surface, obviously that's too much money to be paying even a player as talented as Dame, especially considering his age, but the crazy thing is they really just don't have a choice. They know they need to keep him to be a really good team in the West, and they're willing to pay a premium to keep him on the team, even though he will provide them less on-court value as the deal gets more expensive. And before you say anything about, oh, well, why don't they just trade them away? Then they won't have to pay them. Please just stop it. Trust me, I was on the trade either Dame or CJ hype train last summer after they got swept in the first round by the Pelicans. But if they didn't trade either of them back then, why would they trade either of them after just making the Western Conference Finals? Let's just put that idea away for this offseason, please. Moving on to McCollum, his situation is a little less straightforward. His deal expires at the same time as Lillard's, and he's a year younger, but also is not as good of a player. If they want to keep him, it'll likely take a $30 million a year commitment, which would mean they'd be paying around $80 million a year for just two players for the next 4 years. That is an incredible amount of financial commitment, and I don't really know if they do it, considering that, again, they'd like to avoid the luxury tax and also have enough money to have some other half-decent players on the rest of the roster. They won't consider trading him now, but maybe next offseason with just 1 year left on his deal, they'll consider making that move. In the end, for the Blazers, they're in a pretty good spot to be a good playoff team in the West for the next few years. They can have a solid team next year, then use their 2020 cap space to reshape the roster around their backcourt, or make a move for Kevin Love this offseason to provide a bit more star power. But beyond that, things get really expensive if they want to keep their star backcourt together beyond 2021. With a Lillard Supermax likely and a big commitment needed to keep McCollum around as well, I'm not really questioning how good they'll be for the foreseeable future, but more so how much it's all going to cost. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.